No,
and I
I mean you're
can't.
fine. We don't have to. I mean, we don't have to turn anything off or do anything weird with anything. It's all good.
It might actually tell us at the very end something I can copy
You
paste
don't have
the.
to turn. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, there you go. The reading that we talk about because it picks it out. All right, we're on.
All right. Give me just a second. You hear piano in the background. That's just my kids practicing and or playing. So hopefully that's not too distracting. My little one is uh obsessed with Rondo alla Turco, which we don't have a copy of the music, but YouTube is a cornucopia of instruction, apparently. So, which is cool. So, I wanted to start um, by saying, first of all, that if our audience or even us gets into trouble in section two, don't worry about it because this is essentially, haha, the essence section of nature and also the one that sort of it almost defines the entire philosophy of nature as being very much uh well, I mean, it's the most difficult, but it's also what do I want to say? The notion is concealed. The notion is mostly concealed throughout the entire philosophy of nature. The nature in its notion in its logical form is what I'm trying to say. And that is especially true of the second part, the essential part of philosophy of nature, physics. But before we get there, I want to read through the transition to physics because it sums up what we did in mechanics and sort of gives us uh, an ending point. Up to now, we have conceived of gravity, of the center of gravity for any body in the universe as being outside it. And this is a very odd statement to make about matter. But it's here as we transition to physics that he actually gives the game away and says, just kidding. It's not really outside matter. But once you have reached the totality, or not the totality, but the qualified state of matter, you find that actually all that was previously abstractly defined as external elements of matter are actually internal elements of matter, what make it up in the first place. So I'm going to go ahead and read 271 Transition to Physics to start us out. So the substance of matter, gravity, developed into the totality of form, no longer has the self-externality of matter outside it. At first, form is manifested in the ideal determination of space, time, and motion, that is, in accordance with its differences, and also in accordance with its being for self as a center, which is determined as lying outside self-external matter. But in the developed totality, this asunderness is posited as determined simply and solely by the totality and matter. Apart from this, its asunderness is nothing, right? The form is in this way materialized. Regarded from the opposite point of view, matter, in this negation of its self externality in the totality, has now acquired within itself what it previously only sought, namely the center, its self, determinateness of form. Its abstract, torpid being within itself, as simply heavy, has resolved itself into form. It is qualified matter, the sphere of physics. So, and I'm gonna read the rest of this part because it sort of helps narrate us into the first part of physics. Thus terminates the first part of the philosophy of nature, mechanics constituting a complete sphere by itself. Descartes treated the standpoint of mechanics as the prius when he said, "Give me matter and motion, and I will construct the universe." However deficient the mechanical standpoint may be, and we saw that in the Encyclopedia Logic as a point of view in itself. These words of Descartes unmistakably reveal the greatness of his mind. In motion, bodies exist only as points. What gravity determines is only the spatial interrelationships of those points. The unity of matter is only a unity of the place it seeks, not a concrete one, a self. That is the nature of the sphere, and the externality of the determining of matter constitutes the peculiar determinateness of matter. Matter is heavy, is for itself, a quest for its being within self. The point of this infinitude is only a place, and consequently the being for self is not yet real. The totality of the being for self of matter is posited only in the solar system as a whole. What the solar system is as a whole, matter is now to be in detail. In the solar system, the totality of the form of the notion of matter in general. But now the self-externality is to be the whole, developed notion in each determinate existence. Matter is to be for itself throughout the whole of its reality. Thank you. That is, it finds its unity. This is the being for self, which is for itself. In other words, the solar system as self-moving is the sublating of the merely ideal being for self of the mere spatiality of the determination, that is, of the non-being for self. In the notion, the negation of place is not only a determining of place. On the contrary, the negation of the non-being for self is a negation of the negation, an affirmation, and thus there emerges real being for self. This is the abstractly logical determination of the transition. Real being for self is just this, a totality of the development of being for self, and this can also be expressed as a liberation of the form and matter. The determinations of form which constitute the solar system are the determinations of matter itself, and they constitute the being of matter. The determination and the being are thus essentially identical, but this is the nature of the qualitative. For here, if the determination is removed, the being too is destroyed. This is the transition from mechanics to physics. So as I said, every differentiation of mechanics that we have covered so far has now collapsed into a single point of unity, a totality in which we have transitioned from the sort of schematic outline of what matter's properties are in abstract detail, and it's collapsed into this unity, this totality that includes them all in their differentiation. And that differentiation at the next level in physics is what we're going to go into. So instead of just being the schematic outline, it's going to be that schematic outline in motion. We're going to see it in much more detail. Hang on just a second. I'll be right back. All right, folks. Sorry about that. So that's the transition. Kyle, are you meaning to be muted? Okay, cool. All right. Um, I would I would give more prelude, but really I think we should just jump in with both feet. So if Kyle, if you could just read 272.
All of it or just the paragraph?
Um,
It's short, so
yeah, just the short paragraph.
right. Matter has individuality insofar as having being for self developed within itself, and is therefore determined within itself. Matter thus rests itself from gravity, manifests itself, and determines itself within itself. Previously, the spatial element in it was determined by gravity. in this example, by a center other than matter itself, a center which matter only sought, but now, by virtue of the form immanent in it, matter develops the spatial element out of itself and into opposition to gravity.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so now we have the. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So now we have the collapsed unity from the previous section starting to um, manifest itself and showing what it is. And um, at the very bottom, he tells us that physics has for its content the universal individuality, the particular individuality, and then the total free individuality. And this is interesting to me because I always put the universal and the individual at odds with each other, and with this, it's more of a buildup of what matter I think is within physics, from the most immediate category to the total and free one, by which not only is matter what was manifested in the mechanics section, but also what's, well, mechanic manifested by the physics section. Um, Even my saying that doesn't really make much sense, does it? Um, he gets more specific about what things are, what um, specific determinate bodies are. He goes into light, he goes into stars and the sun, he goes into comets, the moon and the earth, um, and um, he relates them to the totality and the totality to them. Um, I'm not totally familiar with uh, 17th to 18th century physics enough to be able to tell you how closely or not so closely we still hew to some of these things. Um, I think Houlgate can have something to say about that next week when we read his article again. There, well, the portion on light, at least. And so we'll wait until then to get into more specifics. Just right now, I just want to draw your attention to the Zusatz, where he says, gravity as the inward essence of matter, its merely inner identity passes over, since its notion is essentially essential outwardness, into the manifestation of this essence. As such, it is the totality of the determinations of reflection, but these is cast asunder, so that each appears as a particular qualified matter which is not yet determined to individuality, is a formless element. So this idea of gravity as sort of this formless element that's sort of just out there and making things happen. See, gravity has graduated from being something external to matter to being something essentially a part of it, but it's still a very abstract, formless property of matter, is what I think he's trying to say. And he says, these materialized form determinations exist in two ways, once as immediate and again as posited. Okay, so it's what confronts you quite right there, and then the one that appears as thought out, as posited in thought. In the solar system, they appear as immediate existences and again as essentially posited. Just as parents, qua parents, have an immediate existence, but also exist as children, as offspring. Light exists, therefore, once as the sun and also as the product of external conditions. The former is generated intrinsically in the notion, but this must also be posited, and so this reality distinguishes itself as a particular mode of existence. One of the things I think he gets into talking about is the sun and the effects of its illumination in bringing, I guess, to light, no pun intended, the rest of the totality of the solar system, which is really kind of the point. It's called a solar system, right? So he says, and he warns us, this part is the most difficult in nature, For it embraces finite corporeality. He's talking about this essential physics section, the entire section labeled physics. The sphere of difference always presents the greatest difficulty because the notion is no longer present in immediate fashion, as in the first part, mechanics, or the being of nature, one might say. Nor has it yet shown itself as real, as in the third part, organics. Okay, so we're still dealing with very, very abstract concepts, even the ones that we can see in the sky or right in front of us on the earth. The way he deals with those things as named bodies are not to be taken as the physical objects as they are in the organics yet. Okay, that would be the being and the essence combined in the finished notion in organics, if that makes any sense. Here, the notion is concealed. It shows itself only as the connecting bond of necessity, while what is manifest is notionless. In the first part, differences of form are unconnected and mutually independent. Okay? In the second, individuality is in a state of difference, of opposition. So you notice this is the sphere in nature of difference. But again, here in this nested second, individuality itself is in a state of difference. I love the logical underpinning. You know, it, it's like a Jacob's ladder or like a it's like an accordion, right? And each
Spiral, right?
like whatever like take the metric system. Every 10 meters, the system repeats itself 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, large numbers, but they all go by tens, right? Or by hundreds, depending on what you're talking about. Meters, kilometers, centimeters, and so forth. It's the repeating that sort of reflects the dialectic, if I might use that word. So it is only in the third part that individuality itself is mistress over differences of form. So individuality is not fully defined until the very end, until the third part of physics. And really, so what that indicates to me, if you guys might take this as a as as sort of when he talks about the bodies, the sun, the planets, the comets, especially in these first two parts before he gets to the third part, the individual sun and the individual moon are very loosely defined themselves, right? So when you're talking about these things, don't think of them as the astronomical objects so much as the concepts that the parts of the concept of the moon, let us say, right? That we that we freight onto the actual moon that we see in the sky. Is that a good way to put that? I think it is. You
Yeah.
know, something like that. I'm still trying to make sense of exactly how he deals with everything here. Jim, if you could read 274 for us.
Physical qualities exist first as immediate, as separate and self-subsistent existences, the now physically determined celestial bodies. Secondly, as related to the individual unity of their totality, the physical elements. Thirdly, as the process which engenders what is individual in these elements, the meteorological process.
Thanks.
So,
Yeah. And so, even nested within these first two tripartite forms, you have yet another tripartite in which the physics of the universal individuality is delineated. And even from the first, the immediate examples that he gives, the bodies, these immediate manifestations, again, are not the fully developed notion of the real moon, the real sun, right? And so what he's dealing with, again, and I cannot stress this enough, are elements of the categories that we come to think of as the we're so we're submerged in a culture of empiricism, okay? And so when we look at the moon, we imagine ourselves both distant from or on the moon, the actual physical moon, as much as we're immediately involved with standing on the earth, right? But what Hegel is up to here is doing very much what he did in the first part in mechanics, where he's trying to define the various properties and what they mean of the notion of those bodies. Sorry if I repeat myself. So he starts out with the free physical bodies and the yeah, I'm just going to read this through for you guys really quick before we move on to light, because I've read it already, but I want to read it out longhand because I think it might give us a clue as to how to deal with this first section without, starting to sort of doubt Hegel. We really want to follow along with him. So he says, the determinations of the notion now receive materiality. The being for self of matter finds its point of unity. As matter is thus a being for self which is for itself, and the transition of the determinations, their vanishing into one another, has itself vanished. We enter logically into the sphere of essence. Essence is returned to itself in one's other, reflection of determinations into one another, which, as thus reflected into self, now develops as forms. These forms are identity, difference, opposition, and ground. And where have we heard these before but the logic in the essence doctrine? That is to say, matter leaves, and now we get the application. That is to say, matter leaves its first immediacy behind where space and time, matter and motion, passed over into each other until finally in free mechanics, matter appropriated the determinations as its own in the transition, and thus revealed itself as self-mediating and self-determining. Thrust is no longer external to matter. On the contrary, matter's differentiation is its internal immanent thrust. Matter differentiates and determines itself by itself, is reflection into self. Its determinations are material and express the nature of material being. In them, it manifests its own self, for it is merely these determinations. They are material qualities which belong to the substance of matter. What matter is, it is only through its qualities. I'm sensing shades of phenomenology here, especially in this sentence. You know what I mean? Because you have the properties and then you have the unity of the properties, especially in perception, I want to say. You get this sort of what is universal? Well, it's made up of what we've gathered in the senses, unified into the perception, but it can't hold them together. The understanding can, and that I think is what culminates in the truth of the substance of the early part of consciousness, right? So same here. They are material qualities which belong to the substance of matter. What matter is, it is only through its qualities. In the first sphere mechanics, the determinations are still divorced from the substance. Just as we said, they're outside it. They are not material determinations. Substance as such is still shut up within itself, unmanifest, and that is why such substance was only a quest for its unity. So even when we see matter in motion, especially at the level of basic mechanics, its motion is always on a quest for what it is in its totality, and part of that was the circle, the nature of that motion, right? It returns to itself in a philosophical and also a physical way. Quite an elegant way to put that. Kyle, if you could read 275, just the short light.
Matter in its first qualified state is pure identity with self, unity of reflection into self, and hence the first still quite abstract manifestation. As existent in nature, it is a reference to itself as independent in face of other determinations of the totality. This existent universal self of matter is light as an individuality. It is a star. As a star which is a moment of totality is the sun.
My first thought on reading this was that he got it backwards. But again, we're at the most immediate part of this. And as such, usually the immediate gets reversed once you get to the finished product, the result at the end of the tripartite. So at this point, you know, um, I'm not going to read any more into that, honestly. So this is a very, very long Zusatz. Kyle, have you read this 275 Zusatz? I have not yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Remember
Take it away if you like. Anything you'd like to say about it, just in general
Well,
summary, or we could read through it, or whatever you like.
well, I'm just trying to think back because I don't want to convert it too much to 276.
Okay.
Okay, look over those real quick. I mean, I guess the first thing that speaks out to me is it kind of, it's the same thing we started out with space. You have the ambiguous definition of space as extension, and its first negation is the exact, you know, opposite of extension, which goes to a single point. So here's kind of the same thing. Matter essentially, instead of being another like a sublated form of extension, is now itself sublated, pointing into yet again fully into itself.
Yeah.
Just trying to think, was it here or later on? I'm just trying to. I know he later on does complain about the two definitions of light in his era, but I think I'll save it for that. Light must show itself as a product. I guess the thing we could say at this time wasn't really still well known what light was or how it was generated.
Right.
Hmm.
I like this line.
Yeah,
It says, "As existent identity, it is a pure line which refers itself only to itself." So
right.
basically, the beam of light.
Yep, self. Well, it's also kind of the one because it's self-referential, looping back onto upon itself.
Yeah.
Because at this time, well, yeah, that part to speak of space being filled in is, however, ambiguous. For if this filling consists in being for itself, light cannot be said to fill space since the hardness which offers resistance has passed away. So, and it later gets to the point he does hint at dark matter. He finally goes into as opposition later. But in that sense, it is kind of explanation that, well, light just isn't completely filling existence, because if it were, we would be seeing it everywhere. In fact, we probably couldn't see anything because it was pure
Yeah.
light.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. No, you're right.
So he's already critiquing, I guess, one interpretation of light here. And again, I still don't have. I mean, the only things I'm aware of is like Newton's corpuscle theory, which is a particle, and then you got the pure wave theory, which has its ether it propagates through,
Yeah.
which is, I guess I just can find it funny that the end result is a dialectical unity of the truth of both sides.
Right. And even this is really just um the truth of elements.
Mm,
I almost want to say about light, but it's um I don't know. He says light is this pure existent force of space filling. Its being is absolute velocity, pure materiality, which is everywhere present,
here it is.
real existence, which remains within itself, or actuality as a transparent possibility.
What's funny, he talks about it being absolute velocity because it
It
is.
is the absolute velocity. Yes, absolutely.
That's
It,
why we.
it
That's why to me people they keep calling it the speed of light when it's really the speed of causality. It's just Because of that, light speed goes absolute
Yes.
in its nature of being massless, right?
It's funny because it's such a fixture of our common sense physics today. Um, and it how he described it worked back then just as well as today on a certain level.
Right.
You can see how much of this hasn't dated itself, but has remained
Yeah.
up to date.
It's
Uh,
just
He
more a different
anticipated a lot of
explanation.
20th century physics.
Yeah.
He says to speak of space being filled is, however, ambiguous. For if this filling consisted in being for self, light cannot be said to fill space, since the hardness, yes, I'm repeating what you said, which offers resistance, has passed away. On the contrary, light is only present in space and then not as something individual. You look up at the stars and you see light, individual points of the light traveling to us, but there are spaces in between that are not illuminated. Space is only abstract subsistence or virtual being, but light is existent being within self, in sich sein, or existence which is in itself and hence pure, is the power of universal actuality to be outside itself and is the possibility of coalescing with all things. It enters into community with all and yet abides in itself, so that the self-subsistence of objects is in no way affected by it. So, yeah, so I mean, you have the star, but you also have the light that travels from it. And here he's really just talking about the light itself.
Yeah, we
And
go from it being just matter at the center to it generating light.
yeah,
Yeah.
let's see here. He says this manifestation is to be grasped in its first determinateness. As such, it is the wholly universal manifestation, as yet devoid of any determination within itself.
Its determinateness is the indeterminateness.
Yeah. Identity, a reflection into self, complete physical ideality in contrast to the reality of heavy matter. In that this latter connotes differentiation and exclusion, which I mean it does. The star is differentiated and excludes other stars or other matter. But here, the first determinateness, light is the most abstract. It's like space, right? Light is what fills space and yet does not fill all of space. You know, uh, this abstract manifestation, material identity with self, does not yet oppose itself to an other. It is a determinateness oscillation, but only in itself. Hi-
The
I
being for
love I, I love his logical language, but I really wish he would color code it and tell us when he's moved on to summing up. It so someone needs to go through these books and color code them so that you get the logical argument and then you get the summing up. And here you have the sort of opening summary, the ending summary. I don't know. Someone needs to do that because that would make these books so much easier to follow. Because if you're not able to get the full logical argument in, you could at least look at it and say, here it is in its totality. Here it is. Here it is. Focus on this until you master it, right? I almost feel like going past it. One of the problems I have with Alex, and it's a minor problem, is that he realizes the importance of the logical argument, but he doesn't credit it enough with building what comes after, I think. You weren't there this last session, but me and him have a serious difference. Whereas he says he sees the phenomenology of spirit as defining the elements of human history, I see it as defining the elements of consciousness. Now, Hegel himself agrees with me, but for some reason, I don't think Alex sees it. I mean, you did you read my post about history and consciousness that I posted? Okay, I'll
I've been on
I'll
Facebook for a week.
oh, that's fine. I'll tell you about that offline. Um, Okay. Well, unfortunately, I did not read the section, so I cannot summarize it myself. But
He does it. What is it? Does talk about three different manifestations of it. The first one we just went through. The second one,
yes.
yeah,
So he says, light thus lacks the concrete unity with itself possessed by self-consciousness as an infinite point of being for self. It is consequently only a manifestation of the nature and of spirit. For this reason, this abstract manifestation is secondly also spatial, in absolute expansion in space, and not the taking back of this expansion into the unifying point of infinite subjectivity.
yeah. So
Light is infinite spatial dispersion, or rather, it is an infinite generation of space.
it's kind of like space in the sense that it goes from a point and extends out, but in this case, it's just at a higher level.
But it's an untrue existence, is what he
Yeah.
says.
And then
Yeah,
it reaches its limits
and
in darkness.
yeah, yeah, he. It's interesting this section. Um, I don't know if he does this a lot elsewhere, but in this section, which is quite difficult, this second manifestation of light, he really has to contrast it with something that is directly its opposite, which is spirit. Spirit, even in its separate, detached existence, is subject to the absolute subjectivity of the self. Whereas light in this second manifestation is the opposite. It is radically cut off from a unifying universal subjectivity. You know what I mean? It's
It is.
pure. It's pure. What's the word that he used? It's purely dispersed, purely outside of any subjection, detached existence that's fully detached. If you can imagine it that way, you
That's
know.
why you also talked about ego earlier.
Mm,
Because you got to compare it to spirit.
yeah. And then he says, thirdly, light must arrive at its limit. So it reaches a planet and it reflects light off of it, and thus, um, you know, uh, that's its limit within that angle of attack, I guess you could say. Um, However, this necessity of encountering another differs from the absolute limitation of being for self, in virtue of which matter offers resistance. As abstracted identity, light has difference outside it as the not of light. This is constituted by the other reflected determinations of essence, existing as physical corporealities. As the universal principle of making manifest, light is the first satisfaction. Only the abstract understanding gives this universal physical element the highest place. Sorry, I'm just reading through this, trying to. So like you said, it reaches its limit in darkness.
Let's kind of go back to realizing this is in a way of the philosophical system. This is the essence of the entire process, right?
Yeah,
Which because everything is reflected from outside. So.
right. So,
Signaling current is reality.
so space, time, and place, and all of that add up to matter, and this is matter as it is, as it manifests itself essentially. That's a good way to put it, I think. Um, Having developed the notion of light, we must now secondly inquire into its reality. To say that we have to consider the existence of light is to say that we have to consider the being for another of light, but light is itself the positing of being for another. In the existence of light, we must therefore set forth the being for another of this being for another. Oh, God, logic. How is visibility made visible? How is this process of manifestation itself made manifest? Manifestation demands a subject, and the question is how this subject exists. Light can only be called matter insofar as it exists independently in an individualized form, blah, 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 blah. Light come.
It's basically being for another through being for another is it's just a simple double negation. You're seeing its reflected side, right?
Yes. Hmm. Uh, I think so. Um, don't let me agree with anything you're not sure of, because
No, I mean that's what I
I'll
was thinking.
I'll
Just
just agree with it.
double checking that makes sense to you, because I mean
It
you
sounds
already
right.
mentioned this is a reflection point,
Yeah.
so
Yes. Yes, it is. Uh, Ooh, this fact is empirically ascertained and at first is all we have to say about the sun. This body is the primordial, uncreated light, which does not arise from the conditions of finite existence, but immediately is. Stars also are self-luminous bodies, their existence constituted by the physical abstraction of light. Abstract matter exists precisely as this abstract identity of light. This existence of the stars as points of light means that they stay at this level of abstraction, which for Hegel, especially at his level of technology, that's all they can be at this level of essentiality. This inability to pass to concrete existence, far from being worthy of admiration, is rather a defect. It is therefore absurd to regard the stars as superior, e.g., to planets. The sun is not yet anything concrete. I treat this statement in the same way that he treats the being and essentiality and the logic of those categories as not yet being concrete. Okay. He's not actually talking about the physical sun. He knows it's real. He knows it has an effect. He knows it probably burns at a certain temperature and came into being billions of years ago and will pass away billions of years hence. But this is the immediate essence of the sun as it comes to us.
it's almost at the point of the sun worship. It's just a giver of light that at that level.
Yeah. So this is for viewers, this is the level of abstraction, okay? Which means that we've cut off all of what it means to be the sun down to basically what's described here, which from this point of abstraction isn't actually very much. Yeah, piety. I love this. Piety wants to populate the sun and moon with men, animals, and plants, but only a planet can rise to this. Natures which have withdrawn into themselves such concrete forms as preserve independence in face of the universal are not yet to be found in the sun. Only luminous matter is present in sun and stars. So basically saying all that we can say about this body is that it is luminous, that it provides light at this level of abstraction. That is all that it discloses. That's another way to say it. This is fascinating how these determinations come out logically at this point. The connection between the sun as a moment of the solar system and the sun as self-luminous is that in both cases it has the same determination. In the mechanical sphere, the sun is matter related only to itself. This determination is also the physical determination of the identity of the abstract manifestation, and this is the reason why the sun shines. The logical reason, I would add, not the not not the modern empirical equivalent.
Its sun's not fully determined as why it provides light. Yes.
Exactly. Exactly. Um, yeah, and even discussing that, it, he reads my mind, and in the next paragraph says, further, one can inquire into the finite causes of the existence of that which shines in this way. To ask how we receive the sun, the light of the sun, is to regard this light as something produced. Light so determined we see connected with fire and heat in our usual experience of earthly light, which appears as combustion. So interesting here. He immediately relates what the sun is doing to what happens on Earth in terms of combustion, right? We like to divorce what happens on Earth from what happens at the sun, right?
Mhm.
But according to him, the way we're able to populate what we know about the sun is dependent on what we see on Earth and experience quite in front of us. They're connected. They're connected conceptually, and they have to be because we would literally have to send a probe to the sun with a very strong camera to actually get the phenomenological individuality of what happens in the sun. And we have, I think we have already done that. But during Hegel's age, you had to use the analog, and you had to be conscious that it is an analog, if that makes sense. We may therefore think we must say how the solar fire is maintained in order to explain the shining of the sun by analogy with the earthly process of light, where fire must consume material in order to exist. As against this, it must be remembered that the conditions of the earthly process, which occurs in individualized matter, do not yet occur in the relation of free physical qualities. This first light must be distinguished from fire. Earthly light is usually connected with heat. Sunlight also is warmth, but this heat does not belong to sunlight as such, which first warms when near the earth. Sunlight by itself is cold, as shown by high mountains and balloon ascents. So he's differentiating heat as associated with light from the light itself. And he's right. In the vacuum of space, light is just the photons going forth.
Infrared light is in a way is heat, but that's a different form of heat than he's talking about here.
Yeah. Well, he's just talking about the visible, the quite immediate.
Right.
I'm not even sure if he was aware of the the UV part of the spectrum, I guess you could call it.
No, it'd be the other end actually, but
Oh, there we go.
infrared sub-red.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, infrared is under ultra.
I have to find when that was discovered.
Yeah, UV is over. No, you're absolutely right. Blah blah blah. There as
He's
cases
still
of earth
talking about
minerals
light
which emit
only,
light.
though.
Yeah, see, so he talks about all sorts of light that happen in an earthly vein, and he differentiates what the light is from the star, from the sun, from other versions of illumination. He could probably, if he knew about them, he could probably talk about the phosphorescent fish, that are miles beneath the ocean surface that only see because of that phosphorescence itself. Light must also show itself as a product. As a result, I think is what he means. The physical conditions of the solar light do not concern us as us inasmuch as they are not determinations of the notion, but only matters of empirical fact. I love how he differentiates the two. We can, however, say that sun and stars as rotating centers generate internal friction as they rotate. During their period, did they know that the fuel of stars is hydrogen and helium?
No, not in this
Hmm?
day.
No? Okay.
They mentioned something about hydrogen, but I don't think they really understood it.
Yeah. So he doesn't know what the fuel of the so basically one could say that during Hegel's era, even empirically, they didn't know the sun in its full notion as being the the finite burning of hydrogen and helium to create
That was the 20th century discovery.
yeah. And I love how he puts this. We do not know the sun in its full notion. And he leads with that, right? I don't know the entirety of this process, and that's okay. But we have certain things that we can say about it through our reason, right? He doesn't jump the way Kant does into we can't know everything through human reason, and we're not going to. He says we can know about the sun, but we don't know everything yet. All we have are these determinations, and that's it, right? And he leads with we're going to know more, but we don't right now. So that, yeah, I like that. Let's see.
Yeah, 1904. First actual suggestion of radiation of something not, mechanical or chemical. See, I think that's where hydrogen comes in, but it's like that as a burning fuel, but it's a burning fuel, not not nuclear fusion.
Oh, this is awesome. So he quotes General Alex and says, um, "The sun in shining is always emitting light. It is therefore always losing it." Th this logical illusion sort of forewarns of the fuel that keeps it burning. Like eventually it's going to run out. They knew that even then, logically. If one now asks what becomes of the hydrogen which is continually being formed on the planets, General Alex would reply that since it is the lightest gas, it is not to be found in the atmosphere, but that it furnishes the material whereby the losses of the sun are made good. In this conception, there is this amount of truth that the planets project their material development out of themselves and give it an objective shape in the sun. I'm not sure what that means. Oh, honey, leave that because we have to give it back to the office, okay?
Oh,
You think
hi.
it's like that the sun gets its hydrogen from the planets?
I'll confess I don't understand this last piece exactly, but I think it has more to do with the relationality of the solar system and its individual bodies to the star and the star to those bodies. So the reciprocal nature of their physical manifestation. And I think he makes a stab at saying that this element of hydrogen is what they exchange.
Mm-hmm.
And that very well could be the case, especially in the early solar system, where you have, the formation of the sun and the things around it as they cool into the solar system.
Milk.
One moment, I have to put him to bed. I'll be right back. Keep talking. I'm listening.
Trying to find more, but there's so little about this General Alex that I don't find anywhere else he's even mentioned about hydrogen and that sort of thing. So
History of science question.
yeah, pretty much. Google's not even working well for me on that one.
Hegel's day didn't really understand how the sun works. So people may have posited how there's exchange of hydrogen between the sun and the planets.
Was hydrogen even at this time, conceptually? Yeah, it was discovered 17th century. Okay. They that yeah, so they already knew hydrogen can be a fuel at this point. Okay.
Yeah.
He just didn't know what it was yet. uh yeah, and again, that was 20th century science.
Yeah. Because in the late 19th century, it was Lord Kelvin was positing that the sun heat in the sun is generated by the compression of the gases. So,
Yeah.
hydrogen and helium, gravity pulling it all together and causing the sun to heat up and emit light.
Which, I mean, that made more sense at that time. That is, to a certain extent, somewhat true.
Yeah. It created a problem for Darwin's theory of evolution because Kelvin calculated that the sun would ran out of energy after a few million years.
Yeah, which was like 20 million years and was already 300 million years old, at least at that point proven.
And obviously, Darwin's theory required a much longer span of time for different organisms to have evolved into what we see today.
And remember, those calculations were also affected by the social mores, which was that, the Earth was, only 6,000 years old, and the church went after Galileo, and et cetera, et cetera. And so the more they pushed that envelope through empirical observation, the more that they got the social pushback, and so they probably had to be like, okay, well, uh, we're starting to calculate in the millions of years here, and how far are we willing to take that, and so on and so forth.
I had that up. What was it? This that is odd. Okay. Yes. Try it again. I'll see if I can get to it. What I had up. Observational history, development of scientific understanding. Yeah, sun of many colors, absorption lines, optical spectrum. Lord Kelvin says the sun's a cooling liquid body that is radiating an internal store of heat, like you were saying. And then there was the meteoritic hypothesis, the formation and evolution of the sun. Just a bunch of rocks falling into it. Okay. Yeah, there's not really too much to say about it there then. Yeah, they're meteor impacting the sun. I guess I'll go back to earlier bits of that while he's still working. Abstract matter exists precisely because the abstract identity of light. Okay. Yeah, I think I've run out. So what is it here? As the abstract self of matter, light is absolutely weightless, and as matter is infinitely self-externality, but as pure making manifest as material ideality is inseparable in simple self-externality. Yeah, so was it the absolute negation of heavy matter is weightless matter, right? Oh, we did hit 8. Okay, I also just got a copy of Hegel and Newtonianism by another anthology, this one through Petri, another translator. So I want to see how big this is. Okay. Oh yeah, this is 800 pages. There is Hegel and mechanistic models of light. The philosophical background to Hegel's criticism of Newton. Okay. This is just kind of another, not just, let's see, there's math, but that would be logic, and then mechanics, lesson mechanics, optics, chemistry, bibliography. I guess that would be more his and yet an earlier philosophy nature commentary.
Sorry about my absence.
No worries.
Okay, so he says, as the abstract self of matter, light is absolutely weightless, and as matter, it is an infinite self externality, but as pure making manifest as material ideality, it is inseparable and simple self externality. Then he has an entire remark that talks about this, which basically talks about, I'm not sure. What does he talk about there?
I think this part of the remark is kind of getting starts off with people kind of equating like some of the weightless things like thought and stuff like that equivalent to light, making that connection as if it's some sort of reality, but it's actually just yet another simple metaphor. And then yeah, we're not even that far.
Yeah. Yeah. For those watching, sorry, we're not making
Oh,
a lot of headway, but we're also trying
this
to differentiate. Um,
this is where he discusses and compares and contrasts and the particle versus wave theories of his time, Newton's corpuscles, and then the aether of light in light for the wave aspect,
yeah.
which he kind of complains that there's not really any empirical evidence for it either necessarily.
Yet.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Now we're at the point we found that the answer is a dialectical unity of both, which is it's a particularized wave. It's a packet of energy,
Yeah.
which is why it has properties of both. Just like space-time, place has both properties of space and time.
And we've been able to monetize these processes in in the form of electricity and also light transmission along
Fiber optics, yeah.
fiber optic lines, and we can use these principles. They're practical,
Gosh,
you
even
know.
with fiber optics, you can submit multiple different communications at once. You just got to have different frequencies of light
Yep.
that's able to
Packets.
distinguish.
And
Well, like,
even the packets of information that the internet impart to us run on the same principle, I think.
yeah, that's the quickest method right now is fiber optics.
Yeah, that's it's amazing.
Treating indivisibility of light as its infinite expanse. Yeah, trying to critiquing corpuscles and trying to divide it up in a manner that it doesn't make sense. Like it's bundles of rays in single packets, and then trying to remember the opposite. He's talking about, which I know involves the ether. Oh, because it has to be so interpret. It's back to the interpenetration of like hedgehogs, where it's everything's interpenetrating each other. That same metaphor.
Yeah,
But at that point, you have it interpreting like a sort of fog between his examples between the eye and the source. That effectively, it pretty much would be light would be everywhere, and we would be able to see anything.
right. Well, we'd be able to see the light, and so
Yeah,
it would be pure darkness. Yeah, he talks about this in the logic that
yeah.
the
It's
if it was all light, then the seeing wouldn't be able to see, and uh, if it was a blind man looking at I forget the full metaphor,
yeah.
but
Physicists say that light can be weighed in the Azuzots. It's like people thought they could weigh it at the time.
yeah,
Well, I mean, it's like a lot of these sections are not necessarily like there's certain little fine tunings in certain areas, and then the Azuzots would be commentary on current state. There's not a
yeah.
lot of rewrite that needs to be done yet.
Yeah,
At
it's
a,
interesting because even in that era, there are aspects of what they thought was part of what light is that they did measure, which was
yeah.
heat. For
Uh-huh.
example, you could measure ambient heat on the Earth at any one place, and then attribute this to how much or how little light was being imparted to the objects in that particular medium, right?
Right.
Which in a certain sense that they were right about because at higher altitudes it's colder. At lower altitudes where the air is thicker, it imparts more heat to the objects around it through the reflection of the sun. But of course, they didn't know wasn't just the visible light; it was also the invisible light that was imparting this heat itself, which was your point at the beginning, and now I suddenly get that. like in its fullness. Sorry.
Wow.
Um, that's actually quite brilliant. So, if you're on the beach, it's not the visible light that does it, it's the invisible light that gets you a sunburn.
Yeah, UV at that point, yeah.
Yeah. And one can look at that as the heating up as of us as objects, right?
Of course, we
The,
generate light too, but for different reasons as well.
yeah. Yeah. So he gets to the end of this and then he does
It
this.
does another comparison between the ego, which is, I guess, the equivalent for light in the philosophy of spirits. And it's
Yeah.
in a similar space. And that's why, again, we have this religious conception of light and purity and thoughts and that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
I
Okay.
mean, it's a fair comparison, but it's like it's limited.
Well, even at this level of abstraction in the essential,
Yeah,
it can't help but be that
yeah,
in itself.
exactly. And of course, this point was it that, oh, it does get toward the end where he does talk about the interesting discussion where they're talking about light takes time to travel.
Hmm.
And, one must admit that time is as a condition of propagation without involving oneself in these far-fetched conclusions. So he's talking about, what was it? Other interpretations of it, I guess. But he does seem to take into truth the sense of being able to see into the past through because of how long it takes light. Did he talk about that more later, or I know
Ah,
he does.
this is interesting. He starts to talk about attempts during his time by Herschel, among other people, to try to bring the stellar spaces into the stellar into the notion, as he would put it. Basically, bringing more definition, determination into that level of you know,
Ow.
yeah. Laws regarding the propagation of light, which were plainly observed in connection with Jupiter's satellites, were transferred by Herschel to the stellar spaces. These distances are, however, somewhat hypothetical, as he himself admits. So there's the limit of science during his time, which he talks about directly. He's perfectly aware of this, and he translates that into a philosophical truth above when talking about light and the sun and stars as uh, still quite an abstract determination as yet within the philosophy of nature. Yeah, 500 years before we saw much much earlier actually in terms of the stars, I think. Like I'm not sure. What's the closest star to us and
Alpha
Alpha Centauri?
is
Yeah, I was
4 light years.
And how many years does it take to get to us?
4.
4. So the closest star is much closer than the 500 years Herschel talks about here.
Yeah.
That's
There,
interesting.
there is a reality. I think he even says there is a sense of reality to propagation of time, just not Herschel's interpretation of it. Because Herschel is taking time as slowed through air as if it's the same in space.
Which it's not. Yeah.
Right. Will you stop going on?
Okay.
And by the
Uh,
way, it's 9:17 for you, so
yeah.
that's
Yeah. Let's stop here. Um, this is already getting into a lot. And it would probably benefit us to just take this section slowly so that
yeah.
rather than just sort of generalizing, we have a better grasp of the level of abstraction he
Yeah.
remains at here.
It's like
So
if we were to write our own kind of commentary and philosophy of nature, we would want a version, as history of science, both up into Hegel's time and then past it.
Yeah.
I feel like
And honestly, I feel like it wouldn't necessarily change the categorical um relations.
we haven't hit that yet at all.
Yeah,
Everything's already proving itself. It's just clarifying why it fits.
right. All right, comrades, you have a great week. What we're going to do next week is just continue talking about light and going forward. Let's just, if you haven't already, read to the end of the light section and basically all the way up to B, which is it's past bodies of opposition and into um, sorry, get up to B, the elements on page 105. And also, if you can, read the essay again by Houlgate in the Philosophy of Nature Guide, where he talks about light, so that we can clarify some of what Houlgate has to comment about the logic of what Hegel's doing. And then we'll go from there. That'll probably help orient us for the rest of this section. So have a great week.